All right, y'all. Well, we are back on Rooted and Radiant. I am your host, Ashley, and I am so excited that you are here today. We are continuing in this month series, which is all about purpose and calling, why it's worth it. And today's conversation, it's an honest one. You know, it's going to be raw and unfiltered. Today might get a little extra spicy because a lot of these things are real time, which is so cool about this podcast is a lot of it is just aligning with real time life that is going on. But the reality is we love talking about purpose when it's exciting, when things are working, when it feels clear and we can see where we're going. But what about when it's not? What about when your calling feels heavy? When you're doing what you believe you're supposed to be doing, but it's stretching you, it's uncomfortable. And if you're being real, you've questioned if it's even worth it. If that is you, you are in the right place. That is all I'm going to be covering today. And as always, I want you to leave every single episode feeling challenged, feeling encouraged, and feeling inspired. So let's get into today's episode. I truly believe one of the biggest misconceptions about purpose is that it's always going to feel fulfilling. And don't get me wrong, having a calling on your life, it should be fulfilling, but it's not always in the way that you expect because purpose isn't just about what you do. It's about who you're becoming. And that process, y'all, it's not always glamorous. A lot of the times it looks like quiet obedience, doing the right thing when no one is clapping for you, continuing to show up when you don't see the results yet. And I mentioned this scripture last week and I'll mention it again because it is the scripture that I've truly been anchoring myself in. Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose, which means all things, not just the good moments, not just the wins, but the stretching seasons too. So what I want to talk about first is I want to talk about the cost because there is a cost. There is nothing in your life that is worth getting that isn't going to cost you something. If we think of it from a small perspective, if you want to get in shape, you cannot eat cheeseburgers every day. You can't. You just can't do it. If you want to be knowledgeable about your field, you cannot play video games for 6 hours a day. You have to read, you have to educate yourself. So we need to normalize that there is a cost to the calling. And I'm going to cover a couple of things that come with that. Number one, it's going to cost you your comfort. Okay. Your calling will cost you your comfort. There are going to be seasons where you outgrow what once felt easy, where staying where you are would be more comfortable, but you know that you're being called higher. Growth will stretch you before it rewards you. In Genesis 12:1, God tells Abraham, if you remember that story, he tells him to leave everything familiar and to go to a different land. Now, just imagine in a world where you're constantly told, be comfortable, do you, don't do things that stretch you. But ask yourself, truly, what part of your life have you ever achieved something great being comfortable? Wait, there isn't one because that's not how it works. So just like Abraham, he had to have faith and he had to step out because it isn't always going to come with a full plan. It isn't always going to come with detailed next steps. Just go. And that's what calling can feel like, being asked to move without all the details. Number two, your calling will cost you clarity. You are not, I repeat, you are not always going to have the full picture. Sometimes you're only going to get the next step. And you have to decide if you're going to trust God with that. Proverbs 3:5-6 is very clear. It says to trust the Lord with all of your heart and lean not onto your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So it's clear you're not supposed to lean on your own understanding, which means it will not make sense to you. But it doesn't require you to fully understand to be called. It requires trust. Number 3. And this one is a huge one. And I personally feel that this is one of the hardest ones for a lot of people. No pun intended. Your calling will cost you people. Now, this one can hurt because the reality is, y'all, not everyone is meant to go where you're going. And this is something I had to learn a long time ago. People are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. It's like a train stop. Everybody can't stay on. You're going to have some people that are going to be on for a reason. Maybe you needed to learn something from them. Maybe you needed to encourage them in something. And then you'll have people that will be on there for a few stops. Maybe they're your friends in college. Maybe they're your friends, post college for a little bit. But as you change and as you grow, everybody isn't qualified to go where you're going. And also, you need people to be able to cover you where you're going. And everybody can go. And sometimes that's hard. And the other thing that you have to realize is not everyone will understand what God is doing in your life. And this is something my mom used to always tell me. God did not give them the vision, so you cannot expect them to understand it. Some of your relationships will shift, some will fall off, and that does not make you a bad person. It means that you're growing. In Matthew 19:29, it talks about how anyone who has left things behind for God's sake will receive more. And that doesn't always mean replacement in the same form. But what it does mean is that God will provide what you need for the season that you're in. And this is tough. And I want to talk about this a little bit more because I think sometimes when you have these friendships, you think, well, these are lifers. All of these friendships are going to be lifers. And what I have realized, especially in the season that I'm in, is all of your friends, they're at different stages in life. Maybe your friends are in the married with kids stage of life. Maybe they're in the engaged stage of life. Maybe they are, their kids are older. They're getting older. They're in middle school and they're in high school. They're going off to college. And maybe you don't talk as much. Maybe their schedules are busy. Maybe they're running businesses or they just have a lot of things going on. It doesn't make them not your friend. But in the season that you're in, there are specific people that God will place on your life. If you're a believer, and if you're not a believer, when you go through seasons of life that there are people that you're naturally going to gravitate towards. Maybe they're in this similar stage of life. Maybe they're encouraging you. Maybe they're closer. Maybe you're seeing them more. Maybe you naturally spend more time with them. But what I want you to be aware of is you will have ebb and flows in friendships. And I have a lot of friends. And it's kind of the running joke in my friend group of, there's not too many places I can go where I don't know somebody. And that's just because I try to be kind. I truly believe I'm called to be a light anywhere that I go. But there's a season right now where I have a small knit group of women that I'm spending a lot more time with. And we're pouring into each other. We're praying over each other. We're locking arms together. And there are other friends that I still love and I care about, but maybe I'm not seeing them as much. Maybe we're not talking as much, but that doesn't mean that we're not friends. So you have to use wisdom and understand that you're going to have those seasons of life where those friendships are going to shift, and you have to be okay with that. That's the first thing that I think is really, really hard for people. The second thing is, especially for me, control. Your calling will cost you control. You will not always be in charge of how things play out. And if you're like me, that's hard because I like to plan, I like to know what's coming, but calling requires, here's that word, surrender. Jesus says in Luke 22:42, Jesus, not my will, but yours be done. That's the posture. That means it's not your way, it's not your timing, but it's God's timing. And speaking of timing, that's the last thing that your calling will cost you: time. Things won't always happen when you want them to. There will be waiting seasons, moments where you feel ready, but nothing is moving. And it can feel frustrating. But in Ecclesiastics, it always reminds us in 3 and 11, he makes everything beautiful in his time, not our time, his time. And that's something that we have to learn to trust, because I want you to think about it. Think about times in your life where you rushed something. You wanted to get to a destination sooner. Maybe you were traveling and you were like, you know what? I just want to leave earlier. And maybe you got impatient and you rushed ahead. What ended up happening? Everything. There was more traffic. You had to stop more. There were just issues and things that you run into. And then you don't have peace about it. And then you're annoyed and you're frustrated and you're like, I should have just waited, because of all of the domino effect that happens when you try to rush things. I want to let that sit for a second. But here's the encouragement why it's still worth it. Because even with all of that, it's still worth it. It's worth it because of who you're becoming in the process. It's worth it because obedience builds something in you that success never could. It's worth it because your calling isn't just about you. Newsflash. Because there are people connected to your yes. There are lives connected to your obedience. Galatians reminds us in 6 and 9, it says to not grow weary in well doing, for due season we shall reap if we faint not. You will see the fruit. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way that you expected, but you will. But let's be real, okay? I know it gets heavy sometimes. I know there are moments where you've questioned if it's worth it. Moments where quitting would feel easier. But quitting will not give you the life that you've been praying for. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Sometimes hard is confirmation that you're growing. And what I want to remind you of, and this is something that I was reminded of today and I was talking about on the phone with a friend. Every single thing that you go through in your life, y'all, you have two options. You have an option for that to grow you and use it as an opportunity to get stronger. Or you have the option to get weaker because you don't want to be stretched, because you want to prioritize comfort. If there is a calling on your life, it's going to cost you something. Maybe that's sleep. Maybe that's some relationships. Maybe that means setting boundaries with the negative friend that always has something negative to say. Maybe it's a family member that you need to distance yourself from because they're telling you, girl, it don't take all that. Why are you doing all that? Why are you always trying to get something else? Because remember what I said earlier, they do not have the vision, so they will not understand why you're doing the things that you're doing. But the thing you have to be okay with is being misunderstood. You have to be okay with those relationships falling by the wayside, because it should not, and I repeat, cost you your calling. Is it going to be worth it to maintain that relationship that is sucking the life out of you? The negative boyfriend or the negative girlfriend that's telling you you're asking for too much, you're dreaming a little too big. That sounds crazy. Because if you're not careful and you don't set boundaries and you don't distance yourself from those folks, it will cost you your calling, and not in a good way. And the people that are attached to your yes and your obedience will be affected by you not moving forward. So I want to leave you with this. What has your calling cost you lately? And where have you been tempted to quit? And I want you to take a moment, and I really want you to sit with that. And I want to remind you to remind yourself of why you started. Why did you start? I'm about to celebrate 3 years of having this podcast, which is crazy. And I'm going to go into detail and I'm going to talk about the story and where it all started. But the reality is, if I would have not said yes, you would not have been impacted by this podcast. If I would have let fear stop me, if I would have let, I need to have this humongous platform and I need to have all of these things to be impactful, to have a voice, to have a platform, as people would call it today. And it's not about any of that for me. If one person is more encouraged, if one person is more inspired, if one person is more challenged to live boldly in their faith, to make better decisions, to feel more encouraged, to feel more challenged, to have more hope, to give God a second try, it was worth it for me because that is the calling. Have I lost sleep wondering what I'm going to say, how it's going to land? Is it going to be received the way I mean it to be? Yes, but I didn't know what was going to be the outcome. I didn't know what the impact was going to be, but I had to take that first step. I had to say yes to starting the podcast. I had to say yes to being consistent even when I didn't see results. I had to say yes even when I wasn't getting encouraged or told that I was doing a good job, that my friends were proud of me for being consistent and continuing to show up when people didn't ask or understand all of the things that goes behind the scenes, y'all. It matters. And it's quiet sometimes. But the calling has nothing to do about being liked. It doesn't have anything to do about being comfortable. It has everything to do with being obedient and continuing to go even when you don't see the results. So that's your call to action today. Sit with it and ask yourself why you started. And if you're being tempted to quit right now, don't. Keep pushing. Keep pushing, because obedience and consistency will get you much further than your comfort ever will. I love y'all. Thank you for coming every Thursday, 8 a.m., meeting me here. We're going to have a dear friend. She is returning to the podcast next week, and we're going to talk about walking through the doors that you once prayed for. Because a lot of the times, y'all, we pray for these doors and God opens them. And when we're walking through the doors, we're complaining about the same door we were asking God to open. So meet me back here Thursday, 8 a.m. And then week after that, we are wrapping up the month of April and we are celebrating our 3-year anniversary. I love y'all so much. Until next time.